Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Our main character today is Kian Vu, a successful young architect, lived in a world of numbers, logic, and the towering skyscrapers of Saigon. His orderly world shattered with a phone call from his hometown. His father, Tien Vu, was dead. But it wasn't a recurring heart condition. His body had been found at the bottom of the cold, abandoned dry well in the courtyard of the ancestral home. Dragged back to the village of Co Moc, the very place he'd spent his youth trying to escape, Kian had to confront a reality his rational mind couldn't accept. The funereal atmosphere, the fearful whispers from relatives about a curse, a vengeful spirit named Amelia, and a generational debt. His father hadn't committed suicide, he had been trying to pay some kind of invisible debt. Ignoring the warnings, Kian was determined to find the truth behind his father's senseless death. His investigation led him to his father's secret study, which housed an old, leather-bound journal. Its trembling script revealed a horrific tragedy from 200 years ago, the vengeful spirit of a murdered girl, Amelia, whose grave had been robbed by Kian's ancestor, Tien Vu, who stole her only token of love, a jade hairpin. Since then, a deadly curse had clung to every generation of men in the Vu family. Paranormal phenomena began to assail Kian with increasing frequency. Woeful cries, the overpowering scent of white frangipani blossoms thick with the stench of death, flitting white shadows, and the climax, a voice whispering in his ear, "Give it back to me." He knew he was the next one who had to pay this debt. Guided by the cryptic advice of Old Man Hack, a mysterious shaman, Kian learned that the only way to break the curse was to find the hairpin and return it to Amelia. The breathtaking search led him to an unexpected truth. The hairpin was hidden in the very source of all his fears, within the wall of the dry well. During a raging storm, Kian had to face Amelia's vengeful spirit deep within the well to retrieve the hairpin. He succeeded, but would returning the memento be the end of the curse? Or was it just the beginning of an even more cruel and terrible bargain? Just when the curse seemed to have been lifted, a truth more terrifying than death itself began to emerge, from right inside Kian Vu. The end of the debt of the ancient wood will surely be one you can never forget. Listen to the full story to discover the final truth. Please support the channel by, like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for listening. The ringing of the phone shattered the sterile silence of the 23rd floor penthouse. Kian Vu frowned, setting his technical pen down on the glossy black glass desk. Outside, Saigon was melting into a late afternoon haze, its skyscrapers glittering like a giant circuit board, promising a vibrant and lavish night. That was his world, a world built on straight lines, right angles, precise numbers, and billion-dollar contracts. There was no room for ambiguity, and certainly no room for the illogical. The phone screen displayed two words, Uncle Loot. Kian sighed, a vague sense of unease rising within him. Calls from home never brought good news. "Hello, Uncle," he answered, his voice even, trying to maintain a professional distance even with family. The voice on the other end wasn't his uncle's usual booming tone. There was only choked, ragged breathing, interspersed with sobs. "Kian, Kian. You have to come home. Right now. Your father is gone. The tempered glass of the balcony still reflected an impassive Saigon. Kian's ears rang. Gone. Did his heart condition flare up again? He asked, trying to cling to a logical cause, something medicine could explain. His father, Tien Vu, had a history of heart disease. It would have been a neat explanation. No, not that, Uncle Lute's voice broke. They found him. In the well courtyard. Inside the dry well. The dry well. Those 3 words struck Kian's mind like a sledgehammer. He remembered that well. A gaping, dark, circular mouth in the corner of the ancestral home's back courtyard, covered in green moss and devoid of a single drop of water for decades. People said it was haunted, that no one was allowed near it. An illogical death. An event that lay outside the straight lines and right angles of his life. I'm on my way, Kian said, his voice dry. He hung up, the silence of the apartment now oppressive, heavy. He glanced at the half-finished design for a luxury resort on his computer screen. The sophisticated, modern lines suddenly seemed meaningless. An unseen force had just pulled him from his orderly world and thrown him back to the place he had spent his entire youth trying to escape, the village of Co Moc. Kian's silver sedan turned off the highway and onto the narrow, red dirt road leading into the village. The sky was shifting from gray to a dark bruised color, signaling an impending storm. The air grew thick, humid, and carried the smell of mud, decaying leaves, and something else. A faint, cloyingly sweet floral scent, foreign to this mountainous region. Co Moc village appeared from behind a grove of old bamboo. Nothing had changed. The same dark brown, yin-yang tiled roofs, the pockmarked laterite walls, and a silence that was almost deathly. The villagers saw his car pass, their gazes following him not with curiosity, but with a mixture of apprehension, pity, and even fear. It was as if his car wasn't just carrying a son home for a funeral, but a bad omen. The Vu family's ancestral home stood at the end of the village, completely isolated, under the shadow of a colossal banyan tree whose roots surfaced from the ground like great pythons. The house emanated a gloomy, ancient aura. It didn't feel like a place for the living, but more like a tomb built for them. Kian took a deep breath, and the floral scent from before hit his nostrils again, more distinct this time. He realized it was the smell of frangipani. A large white frangipani tree, its branches lush and full, was covered in clusters of pristine white blossoms, planted right next to the dry well in the back courtyard. How strange. He didn't remember a frangipani tree ever being there. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of incense. A portrait of his father, Tien Vu, was placed neatly on the altar. In the photo, he looked at Kian, his eyes sad and weary, as if death were merely a long-awaited release. Uncle Lut ran out, his eyes red, and grabbed his hand. "You're back. Oh, Kian, your poor father." Throughout that evening, Kian sat silently beside the coffin. He listened to the whispers of his relatives, stories told in frightened voices. They weren't talking about heart disease. They talked about the curse, about Amelia, about the debt that Tung had to pay for his ancestors. They said that in his final weeks, his father barely slept, spending every night sitting alone in the back courtyard, muttering to the well. Someone even swore they had seen the white, ghostly figure of a woman lurking around the house at night. Kian heard it all, but his mind shut it down. Superstition. The product of rural, fearful minds. His father had died of a stress-induced stroke and, in a state of delirium, had accidentally fallen into the well. A tragic accident, but entirely explainable. He told himself this, repeating it like a mantra to calm himself. Night fell. The visitors had all gone home. Only Kian and a few close relatives remained, keeping watch over the coffin. The house sank into a silence so thick he could hear the blood pulsing in his ears. The wind began to howl outside, rattling the old wooden window frames, creating creaks and groans like mournful cries. Kian pulled a thin blanket tighter, trying to catch some sleep on a cot. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep. A sudden chill shot down his spine, jolting him awake. The house was pitch black, save for the single, flickering oil lamp on the altar, which cast a ghostly, yellow light. Everyone else was sound asleep. And then he heard it. A sob. Not the wind. It was the sound of a woman crying, heartbroken and mournful, echoing from the back courtyard. The cries sounded terrifyingly real, mingling with the patter of rain that had begun to fall on the tiled roof. Kian shot up, his heart pounding. He strained to listen. The crying seemed closer now, right outside the window. "Who's there?" He called out involuntarily. There was no answer. Only the steady, persistent sobbing. At the same time, the scent of white frangipani suddenly grew overpowering, flooding the room and eclipsing the smell of incense. It was no longer a pleasant, faint fragrance, but cloyingly sweet and rank, as if thousands of flowers were rotting right beside him. Kian felt the hair on his neck stand on end. He glanced toward his father's altar. In the flickering lamplight, Tung's portrait seemed to be looking at him, his eyes no longer sad, but wide with terror, as if trying to warn him of something. Another sound. Very close this time. The wooden door to the inner room, his father's bedroom, was slowly creaking open. There was no wind. No one was there. It simply moved on its own, revealing a deep, inky blackness within. Kian held his breath, his body rigid. The architect's logic, his belief in an orderly world, it was all beginning to fracture. He stared into that darkness, feeling as if an unseen pair of eyes was staring back at him from the shadows. The crying in the courtyard had stopped. Instead, he heard a whisper, right beside his ear, a cold, distant female voice. "Give it back to me." The burial took place the next morning in a torrential downpour. The sky over Co Moc was a heavy, slate-gray sheet, like a giant funeral shroud. Kian stood before the newly piled grave, letting the cold raindrops lash his face. He felt empty. The grief of losing his father was being overwhelmed by confusion and a fear that was slowly taking root in his heart. He had tried to convince himself that the events of the previous night were just a product of exhaustion, hallucinations born from the mournful atmosphere. But their clarity, the overpowering scent of frangipani, and that whispered voice, continued to haunt him relentlessly. After everyone had left, only Kian and Uncle Lut remained. His uncle looked at him, his eyes filled with worry. "Kian, what are your plans? Will you stay for a few days or head back right away?" "I'll probably stay a few days to sort through Dad's things before I go," Kian replied, his voice a bit hoarse. He wouldn't admit it, but a part of him didn't want to leave immediately. He needed answers. He needed to prove to himself that it was all just a coincidence. "Alright, that's good," Uncle Oot nodded, then hesitated. "But be careful, son. This house. It hasn't been peaceful lately. Before he passed, your father kept talking about the debt. He said it was his turn to pay." "What debt, uncle?" Kian asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's all just superstitious nonsense." Uncle Oot just sighed and shook his head. "I don't know. But your father believed it was real. He spent the last decade of his life researching it. You should check his study. Maybe you'll find something." Tung's study. It was a small room at the end of the hallway, its heavy ironwood door always locked. As a child, Kian had always been curious about that secret room, but his father never allowed anyone inside. He said it was where he spoke with the ancestors. To a young boy like Kian back then, the statement was bizarre and outdated. It was one of the reasons the distance between father and son had grown ever wider. Now, the room's owner was gone. A ring of old keys lay on a table, among them a tarnished brass key. Kian picked it up, feeling the cold metal seep into his skin. He walked to the end of the hall, where the shadows seemed to pool and thicken. The smell of dampness and old paper wafted from under the door. He slid the key into the lock. The sound of metal on metal was jarring in the silence. The lock gave a dry click. The heavy door swung open, revealing a space so cluttered it was hard to believe, a complete contradiction to his father's usually tidy nature. Papers were strewn across the floor. Books were stacked in towering piles, mostly history books, old geographical surveys, and even some yellowed books in ancient Nam script. The walls were plastered with sticky notes, hand-drawn maps of the Co Moc forest, and complex family trees. In the center of the room was a wooden desk, and on it, next to a small, extinguished incense burner, lay a worn, black leather-bound journal. Kian stepped inside, feeling as if he were intruding on a private world, a decades-long obsession. He closed the door, shutting himself off from the rest of the house. He approached the desk, pushed aside some loose papers, and picked up the leather journal. It had no title. He opened the first page. His father's handwriting, shaky and rushed, appeared. March 15th. Another night. Amelia came again. She isn't crying anymore. She just stands by the frangipani tree, staring at my window. The smell of the flowers is getting stronger. I know I don't have much time left. The debt of our ancestor, Tien, my grandfather's generation, my father's generation, no one could pay it. Now it's my turn. I've tried, but I still can't find it. That jade hairpin, where did Tien hide it? Or did he lose it? Without it, how can Amelia's soul be freed? The curse will never end. Kian read the passage over and over, each word drilling into his head. Amelia. Tien. The jade hairpin. The curse. These weren't the rambling notes of a senile old man. This was the journal of a desperate investigation. His father wasn't crazy. He was fighting something Kian couldn't comprehend. He flipped hastily through the next pages. The entire journal was a collection of similar entries, excerpts from old books, speculations, and fears. He read about Tien Vu, an ancestor from over 200 years ago, a man known for being reckless and greedy. He read about an ancient tomb in the Co Moc forest, the tomb of a young girl named Amelia, who was murdered by a local mandarin who coveted her beauty and wealth. The mandarin then fabricated a story that she had died of a plague to cover his crime. The villagers, out of fear, dared not speak up. Tien Vu, hearing rumors of gold and silver buried in the tomb, secretly excavated it one rainy night, but only found an exquisitely crafted hairpin of jade. He took it. From that moment on, disaster began to befall the Vu clan. Tien Vu himself died a horrific death, struck by lightning in his own courtyard. His son died young from a strange illness. In every subsequent generation, one man in the direct line of descent would suffer misfortune, dying an untimely death, usually in an even-numbered year of their age. The curse of Amelia, her soul unable to find peace because a grave robber had violated her final resting place and stolen her most cherished memento, had clung to the Vu family like a starved leech. A chill ran down Kian's spine. He looked around the room. The notes on the wall were no longer meaningless scribbles. They were the map of a war his father had lost. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept into the room from nowhere, scattering the papers on the desk, even though the door and window were shut tight. The overhead light flickered violently and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. In that breathless moment of silence, Kian heard a rustling sound right behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Just the paper-covered wall. But then, as his eyes adjusted to the dark, he saw it. One of the hand-drawn family trees was slowly peeling itself away from the wall, as if an invisible hand were pulling it down. The paper fluttered to the floor, revealing a line of text written in something dark brown, like dried blood, that had been on the wall underneath. Your turn. Kian's heart stopped. At the same time, the ghostly humming of a woman began to fill the room, hauntingly clear. The melody was sorrowful, mournful. Panicked, Kian scrambled for the door. His hand trembled as he fumbled for the knob. He burst out of the room, slamming the door shut behind him. The humming didn't stop, it seemed to follow him down the hall. He ran all the way to the main hall, panting, his back pressed against a wooden pillar. The scent of white frangipani once again filled the space, thicker than ever before. Kian looked towards his father's altar. The leather-bound journal, which he was certain he had left on the desk in the study, was now lying neatly in front of Tong's portrait. It was open to a new page, one he had never read. Under the flickering oil lamp, he could see a drawing. A crude but haunting sketch. It was a woman with very long hair that veiled her face, revealing only a pair of soulless, white eyes. She was standing next to a well. Beneath the drawing, his father's shaky, desperate handwriting had inscribed a single sentence. She is not in the well. She is everywhere. Stunned, Kian stumbled backward, a horrifying realization constricting his chest. He understood. His rationale had completely collapsed. The thing his father had faced was real. That vengeful spirit was real. And now, it was coming for him. The journal slammed shut abruptly, as if struck by an invisible hand. The Vu family's nightmare had only just truly begun for him. All that night, Kian didn't sleep. He sat huddled on a long bench in the main hall, his back against the cold wall, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Every gust of wind whistling through the cracks, every scrape of a dry branch on the roof, made him jump. The logical, orderly world he had always revered had shattered into a million pieces. Here, in this ancient house, the laws of physics seemed to bend, yielding to another power, ancient and malevolent. He didn't dare return to the study, nor did he dare close his eyes, afraid that when he opened them, he would see that face with the soulless white eyes staring at him. When the first faint streaks of dawn pierced through the door cracks, chasing away some of the thick darkness, the fear in Kian began to subside slightly. Daylight brought with it an illusion of safety, making the terrors of the night seem distant, almost like a dream. Could it be? Could he have imagined it all? Due to stress? Grief? A psychological defense mechanism? Kian clung to that fragile thread of hope. He had to verify it. With his heart still racing, he took a deep breath and forced himself to walk down the hall, toward his father's study. He pushed the door open. Inside, everything was completely normal. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing in the air. The leather-bound journal was still on the desk, exactly where he had left it. Trembling, Kian approached the wall where he had seen the bloody writing. There was nothing. Only the yellowed plaster and fine cracks. The words "your turn" had vanished without a trace. A chill ran down Kian's spine, but this time it wasn't from fear, but from a profound sense of bewilderment. It wasn't just trying to scare him. It was toying with him. It wanted him to doubt his own sanity, to get lost in a labyrinth between reality and illusion. But the memory of last night's terror was too real, too intense. He knew what he had seen. He wasn't crazy. He couldn't stay in this house alone and find the answers himself anymore. He needed information from the outside. He needed someone to confirm that he wasn't the only one feeling this ghostly presence. Remembering Uncle Oot's words, Kian decided to go into the village. He needed to talk to the elders, the people who had lived in Co Moc their whole lives, who surely knew more than they let on. Kian drove to the small market in the center of the village. Usually, this place was bustling with the sounds of buyers and sellers. But today, when they saw him, the atmosphere seemed to deflate. The people who had seen him at the funeral, who had patted his shoulder in sympathy, now avoided his gaze. He approached a vegetable stall where an old woman was preparing betel nuts. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Kian, Tung's son." The old woman looked up, her cloudy eyes scanning him for a moment before she quickly looked down again, her hands nimbly preparing the betel. "I know. What do you want?" "I just wanted to ask a little about my family's house." Before Kian could finish, the old woman waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing to ask about. Every house is its own business. Mind your own." She then turned away, muttering something to the person next to her. He went to a tea stall where a few old men were chatting. The moment he pulled up a stool to sit, the table fell silent. They looked at him, then at each other. One man coughed and stood up. "I have to get going." Another made an excuse and left. Soon, only Kian and the shop owner remained. A wall of silence. An invisible ostracism. They didn't hate him, they feared him. Or more accurately, they feared the shadow that loomed over his family. As Kian walked away, he clearly heard a female vendor spit on the ground and whisper just loud enough for him to hear, "Cursed." The word was like a knife to his pride. In Saigon, he was Kian Vu, a respected and successful architect. Here, he was just the cursed one, an omen of misfortune everyone wanted to avoid. Desperate, Kian went to Uncle Oot's house. He didn't beat around the bush. "Uncle, you have to tell me. Who in this village knows the most about that curse? I don't believe in ghosts, but the things happening in that house are not normal. I need an explanation." Uncle Oot looked at his nephew with a pained expression. He poured Kian a cup of hot tea. "Kian, there are some things you shouldn't dig into. Your father tried, and you see how that ended. You are the only hope for this family line, don't follow in his footsteps. I'm not going anywhere until I know the truth." Kian insisted, his voice sharp. "It killed my father. I can't just leave." Seeing the determination in Kian's eyes, Uncle Oot finally sighed in defeat. "All right. There is one person. But I'm not sure he'll help you. It's Old Man Hack. A shaman, or as people call him, a sorcerer. He lives on the edge of the Co Moc forest. He's very eccentric, doesn't socialize with anyone. Your father went to see him a few times, but each time he was chased away with a broom. Old Man Hack." The name itself sounded mysterious. He was Kian's only hope now. He asked for directions and drove straight there. Old Man Hack's house was just as his uncle had described, a dilapidated shack perched precariously on a hillside, right at the edge of the gloomy forest. Strange talismans, dried herb pouches, and animal bones dangled around the house. A thick smell of burning incense and scorched medicinal herbs permeated the air. Kian knocked. After a long moment, the door creaked open. A thin, stooped old man with a shock of tangled white hair appeared. He wore only a pair of old black pants, revealing a wiry torso covered in strange tattoos. But what struck Kian the most were his eyes. Bright and sharp as a knife, they seemed to see right through to a person's soul. "Who are you looking for?" Old Man Hack asked, his voice a hoarse rasp. Sir, I'm Kian, Tien Vu's son. I wanted to ask you about something." Hearing Tung's name, Old Man Hack's eyes narrowed. He sized Kian up from head to toe, then looked past his shoulder, as if seeing something invisible clinging to him. "So you're back. Sooner than I thought. You know me?" Kian asked, surprised. "I don't know you, but I know the thing that's following you," Old Man Hack growled. "What are you here for?" "To ask about Amelia." "About the curse?" "Get out. Go back to your city and live your life. This place isn't for you. The Vu family's debt is not something a kid like you can pay. Your father was a fool for trying, and you'll be a fool if you follow that path. The forest will swallow you whole." With that, Old Man Hack tried to slam the door shut. Kian quickly blocked it with his hand. "Sir, please. My father is dead. I just want to know why." Old Man Hack froze. He looked deep into Kian's eyes, a look of both anger and a hint of pity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blackened wooden amulet, carved with strange, wriggling characters. He shoved it into Kian's hand. "Take this. It won't save you. But maybe it will keep your soul from being torn to shreds immediately. Now get out." Old Man Hack used all his strength to push Kian away and slammed the door, bolting it from the inside. Kian stood frozen outside, clutching the cold amulet in his hand. He felt a bitter sense of failure, but at the same time, Old Man Hack's words confirmed one thing: he knew. He knew everything. Returning to the ancestral home, Kian felt more alone than when he had first arrived. Old Man Hack's amulet lay heavy in his pocket, a testament to the existence of the supernatural world he had once denied. The house felt like a silent, watchful monster, waiting for him. He decided that if no one would help him, he would find the answers himself. He had to decipher what his father had left behind. For the next few days, Kian locked himself in the study. He spread all of his father's notes and maps on the floor, trying to arrange them in some chronological or logical order. He reread every page of the leather-bound journal. Gradually, a story of tragedy and injustice came into sharper focus. Amelia hadn't just been murdered. She had been betrayed by the man she loved. That cowardly lover had colluded with the district mandarin, setting a trap to possess her. The jade hairpin was a token of love he had given her. Tien Vu's act of robbing the grave and taking the pin was not just theft, it was the ultimate desecration of Amelia's love and shattered soul. It had twisted her sorrow into eternal hatred. The journal also contained detailed maps of the Co Moc forest. Kian realized his father had spent years trekking through the forest, marking every tree, every stream. And there was one area he had circled many times in red ink, with the note, "White frangipani tree, Amelia's grave." The terror in the house also changed. It was no longer vague. The spirit seemed to know Kian was learning about it, and it began to retaliate more directly. The sounds were no longer distant cries. Kian began to hear the full melody of the lullaby he had heard in the study. A tragic, wordless tune, sometimes echoing from his late mother's room, other times seeming to be sung right outside his bedroom window. Some nights, he heard slow, creaking footsteps on the wooden attic floor above, the sound of someone pacing back and forth, relentlessly. The smell of frangipani became a tool of psychological torture. It would appear suddenly in locked rooms, heralding Amelia's presence, then vanish without a trace. Sometimes, the sweet scent would mix with the smell of damp earth and the stench of decaying leaves, the smell of a freshly dug grave. Then came the touches. He would feel sudden drafts of icy air brush against the back of his neck as he walked down the hall. One afternoon, while reading, he felt someone blow a cold breath into his ear. He spun around to find no one there. The peak came one night. As he was drifting off to sleep, he clearly felt a cold, damp, icy hand gently caress his cheek. Kian screamed, bolting upright, drenched in sweat. He grabbed a flashlight, his hand trembling as he swept its beam around the empty room. There was no one there. But the sensation of those cold fingers still lingered on his skin. The psychological torment culminated in a dream, or rather, a nightmare so vivid it felt real. In the dream, he was no longer Kian Vu. He was Amelia. He felt everything. The heartbreak of seeing her lover lead the Mandarin to her. The terror of being chased through the pitch-black forest at night. He felt the sharp branches tearing at his skin, his legs giving out, and his lungs burning for air. And finally, he felt the crushing blow to the back of his neck, the sensation of being thrown into a cold pit, and the absolute horror as the first shovelfuls of dirt were thrown onto his face, filling his mouth and nose while he was still alive. He struggled in desperation, feeling the darkness and the weight of the earth slowly crushing him. Kian woke up with a jolt, his mouth gaping as he gasped for air. He coughed violently and was disgusted to find the taste of dirt and grit in his mouth. Tears and sweat mingled, streaming down his face. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory. A memory implanted directly into his mind. Amelia's pain and rage had now become a part of him. The nightmare was a turning point. Kian's fear was still there, but within it, something else had sprouted, a strange empathy for the vengeful spirit. He understood that her anger wasn't mere cruelty, it was born from a pain and betrayal too immense to bear. His goal had now changed. It was no longer about running or proving anything. He had to find a way to free her, to finish the work his father had left undone. Carrying the horrifying memory of the dream and the new information from the journal, Kian went to Old Man Hack's house once more. This time, he didn't knock. He stood outside and called out, "Old Man Hack. I know you're in there. I didn't come to ask. I came to tell. He stood there and recounted everything. He told him about the journal, about Tien Vu's crime, about Amelia's tragic story. And then, he recounted the nightmare, describing every detail with precision, from the pain of betrayal to the feeling of suffocating beneath the earth. Inside the house, there was no reply. But Kian knew the old man was listening. When he finished, silence enveloped the area. A long moment later, the sound of a bolt being unlatched creaked through the air. The door opened a crack. Old Man Hack looked at him, his eyes no longer angry, but filled with a complex mix of astonishment, weariness, and perhaps a flicker of hope. He looked into Kian's eyes, as if searching for a trace of Amelia within them. "Come in," he said softly. For the first time, Kian stepped inside the shack. The space was cramped, dark, and suffocating. Old Man Hack poured him a cup of strong herbal tea. "Your father, he told me similar things," the old man began, his voice flat. "But he couldn't feel it like you do. He only knew through books, through stories. But you have seen. Amelia has shown you her pain." Old Man Hack finally broke the silence he had kept for decades. He recounted the parts that weren't in Tung's journal. Amelia's soul was bound to the jade hairpin. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a token of their love, a vessel for her brief moment of happiness. It was the anchor that kept her soul tethered to this mortal realm. As long as the hairpin was separated from her grave, she would never find peace. "The curse is not just about killing," Old Man Hack continued, his voice chilling. "Before it kills, it slowly erodes the victim's soul. It gnaws at them with fear, despair, and loneliness. It wants the men of the Vu family to taste exactly what it went through before they die." He explained why he had sent Tung away. "Your father was a good man, but he went about it the wrong way. He tried to buy talismans, to find artifacts to suppress or fight Amelia. The more he fought, the more she hated. You cannot fight hatred with force. You can only answer it with repentance and atonement. So what do I have to do?" Kian asked, his voice urgent. "I have to find the hairpin and return it to her." "That's right," Old Man Hack nodded. "It's the only way." "But where is it?" Kian almost shouted in desperation. "It's been 200 years. Tien could have hidden it anywhere, or sold it, or thrown it away." Old Man Hack shook his head, a sad smile flickering across his wrinkled face. "Your ancestor, Tien Vu, was a greedy man, but he was also a coward. After taking the hairpin, he was immediately haunted and terrified by what he had done. He wouldn't have thrown it away, for fear its power would still be bound to him from afar. He wouldn't have dared keep it in the house, for fear Amelia would come inside to reclaim it. He was a mason, a man who worked his whole life with stone and wood. Think like him. Where would such a man hide something he both coveted and feared to his very core? Think like a mason. Hide something you both desire and fear." Kian left Old Man Hack's house, the shaman's final words echoing in his head. He returned to the old house and stood in the middle of the courtyard. He looked at the ironwood pillars, the laterite walls, trying to put himself in Tien Vu's shoes. A safe place. A durable place. A place no one would suspect. His eyes swept across the wide courtyard, and then they stopped. They stopped on the gaping, black mouth of the well. The well. The epicenter of all the recent horror. The place where his father was found. The place where Amelia stood in the drawing. It was built of ancient stone slabs, a solid, eternal structure. A perfect place to hide a secret. A horrifying, cold truth shot through Kian. He understood. The hairpin was never lost. It had been there, for 200 years, hidden deep inside the stone wall of the well. And his father, in his final days, must have realized it too. That's why he kept lurking around it. He didn't commit suicide. He wasn't pushed. He had been trying to get it out. And Amelia, somehow, had not allowed it. The well became the focal point of all fear, a gateway to hell right in the middle of his backyard. Kian stood before it, the cold truth he had just discovered making him feel both disgusted and determined. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't live in this house, in this village, with a vengeful spirit haunting him every night. He had to go down there. He had to retrieve the hairpin. For the rest of the day, Kian moved like a machine. He pushed all emotion aside, focusing methodically on his preparations, as if planning a construction project. It was the only way to keep himself from going insane. He went to the storage shed and found a coil of old but still sturdy jute rope. He checked his high-powered flashlight, replacing the batteries with a fresh set. He found a small sledgehammer and a hard steel chisel. He arranged each item neatly on the courtyard ground, a toolkit for excavating a vertical grave. He decided to act at night. Logic told him that working in daylight would be safer, but some instinct urged him to face Amelia in her domain, in the darkness she ruled. Perhaps it was the only way to show respect, or perhaps he was just procrastinating the inevitable terror. Dusk fell upon Co Moc village, staining the sky a bloody crimson. The air inside the house grew heavy, so thick it was hard to breathe. Kian could feel Amelia's presence more clearly than ever. She was watching. He knew it. He could feel her invisible gaze piercing through the wooden walls, pinning him down. He brought his tools to the back courtyard. The scent of white frangipani was overpowering, but tonight it held no sweetness, only a sharp, acrid warning. He tied one end of the rope securely to the base of the ancient banyan tree, its roots digging deep into the earth like giant claws. He checked the knot 3 times before slinging the other end over his shoulder. He stood on the edge of the well and took a deep breath, the cold night air flooding his lungs. He switched on the flashlight, aiming its bright white beam into the inky black pit. In the light, he could see the mossy, damp stone walls and the intricate webs of spiders. He began to lower himself down. The world above shrank to a dim circle and then disappeared, giving way to absolute darkness and the silence of the earth. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of rotted earth, musty moss, and that demonic frangipani scent. The flashlight in his hand became the only source of light, its beam trembling on the slippery stones. He began his work. Clinging to the rope with one hand, he used the other to tap each stone with the hammer, listening to the echo. The sound was small and lost in the eternal silence. And then, Amelia began her assault. First came the sound. He heard whispers echoing from the deep darkness below, exactly like what he'd heard in the study. Give it back to me. The voice was sometimes distant, sometimes near, sometimes a woman's, sometimes a chorus of dozens, creating a ghostly choir. Kian tried to ignore it, focusing on his task. But then, another voice spoke, one that was painfully familiar. Kian. Kian, my son, come up. Don't make it angry. It's dangerous. It was his father's voice. Kian's heart clenched. He knew it was an illusion, a cruel trick by the vengeful spirit. But it sounded so real he almost believed it. He squeezed his eyes shut, gritted his teeth, and tried to push the image of his father from his mind. Rest in peace, Dad. I'll handle this. He continued tapping. And then he found it. A large stone, about halfway down the well, that produced a dull, hollow thud when struck. It was a disguised cover. He took out the chisel and sledgehammer, his heart beating like a war drum in his chest. The moment the steel tip of his chisel touched the crack in the stone, the entire well seemed to awaken. The rope he was clinging to began to vibrate violently, as if someone were yanking it hard from above. The whispers turned into a single, maddened, wailing scream that tore through the space, ricocheting off the well walls and hammering at his ears. He felt cold, slimy fingers grabbing at his ankle from the darkness below. Panicked, he aimed the flashlight down. In a brief, horrifying instant, the beam illuminated a woman's face, pale, waterlogged, her hair matted with mud and filth. And most terribly, the face had no eyes, only two deep, black, empty sockets staring straight up at him. Kian screamed, nearly losing his grip on the rope. He clung to it, his knuckles turning white. The image vanished instantly, but its ghastly, terrifying impression remained. Driven by fear, Kian had no choice but to continue. He worked frantically, ignoring the spirit's assaults. The screaming grew shriller, the temperature in the well plummeted, and his breath plumed in white clouds. Water began to seep from the cracks around the stone he was chiseling, a cold and foul-smelling liquid that dripped onto him. He knew this wasn't ordinary well water. These were the tears, the hatred, of Amelia. He summoned all his strength and brought the hammer down one last time. The stone fractured. He used the chisel to pry it aside. A dark cavity was revealed. From within, a blast of frigid air, thick with the nauseating smell of frangipani and graveyard soil, hit him in the face, making him gag. Holding his breath, he reached into the dark hole. His fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, wrapped in a layer of rotted silk. He pulled it out. It was the jade hairpin. Under the flashlight's beam, it appeared flawless. An exquisite sculpture of a frangipani blossom, carved from a block of mournfully deep green jade. It was unnaturally cold, a chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. The moment he clutched the hairpin, an unbearable torrent of emotions flooded his mind. The pain of betrayal, the rage of an unjust death, the loneliness of 200 years of imprisonment. All of Amelia's emotions crashed into him like a tsunami, making his head spin, nearly causing him to pass out. He had what she wanted. And she was utterly enraged. The entire well began to shake violently, as if in an earthquake. Small stones started to rain down from above. The rope he was holding suddenly went taut, its jute fibers beginning to fray and snap, as if being cut by an invisible knife. He only had seconds. Without another thought, Kian began to climb desperately. He held the jade hairpin tightly, its coldness seeming to fuel him with a frantic strength. He could hear a horrifying, gurgling growl rising from the bottom of the well, growing louder, as if some beast were scrambling up behind him at an incredible speed. He threw himself over the lip of the well, tumbling onto the muddy ground just as he heard a sharp. The rope had broken. Kian lay there, panting, his whole body trembling, still clutching the jade hairpin. The screaming from the well died out, replaced by a dead silence that was even more terrifying. He had won this battle, but he felt no joy. Only a cold, gut-wrenching sense of dread. He had taken her anchor. Now, Amelia was free from the well. She was loose. And she was truly furious. Kian staggered into the house, drenched and covered in mud. He placed the jade hairpin on the ancestral altar, right next to his father's portrait. The small object seemed to radiate a cold, malevolent energy, blanketing the entire house in a tangible threat. The house was no longer just haunted. It was possessed. Amelia's attacks changed again. No more sudden scares. Now it was all-out terror. Doors throughout the house slammed open and shut violently, creating sounds like explosions. Objects on the altar and shelves flew through the air, smashing against the walls. The melody of the lullaby Amelia used to hum was no longer mournful, but chaotic and shrill, like a jeering taunt. Kian saw her everywhere. A white shadow flitting past the window. A long-haired figure standing at the end of the hall for a second before melting into the darkness. When he collapsed onto his bed from exhaustion, he found a long, black strand of hair on his pillow. Amelia was trying to push him to the brink of insanity before he could even reach the forest. He knew he wouldn't survive another night in this house. Despite the pouring rain, Kian grabbed the jade hairpin, burst out the door, and ran for his life toward Old Man Hack's house. He pounded on the door. When Old Man Hack opened it, his eyes immediately locked onto the hairpin in Kian's hand. The shaman staggered back a step, his face pale with horror. "My God! You actually got it." Old Man Hack quickly pulled Kian inside and bolted the door. "You've done the most dangerous thing possible," he said, his voice trembling. "You disturbed it without immediately returning it. Now Amelia is no longer bound to the well. She will follow this hairpin, like a shadow. You must complete the ritual at once. Tonight." "Tonight?" Kian was stunned. "Yes." Old Man Hack affirmed. "It is fated. Tonight is the full moon of the 7th month. The night she was murdered. It is the night her resentment is strongest, but also the only night she can be released." Old Man Hack explained exactly what to do. At the hour of the rat, the moment between 2 days, he had to take the hairpin into the forest, to Amelia's exact grave beneath the white frangipani tree. He had to use his bare hands to dig a small hole at the head of the grave. Then, he had to place the hairpin inside and pour his own blood over it. The blood of the one who committed the sin, or the blood of his descendant, must be the last thing to touch it, Old Man Hack explained with a grave expression. It is atonement by bloodline. Only then can the vengeful energy be neutralized. The sun set completely. A pitch-black night descended on the Co Moc forest. Kian stood at the forest's edge, where the path led deep inside. The entrance looked like a gaping black mouth, waiting. The wind howled through the canopy, sounding like Amelia's mournful screams. In his hand was the ice-cold jade hairpin, a small sharp knife, and a flask of water to keep the wound from clotting too quickly. He glanced at his watch. It was almost the hour of the rat. He had faced the demon in his house, in his mind, and at the bottom of a deep well. Now, he had to face the source of it all, right in its own domain. There was no turning back. Kian took his first step into the forest. Immediately, a different feeling enveloped him. The air grew noticeably colder, and all the sounds of the village behind him vanished, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. Even the wind fell silent. Only the rustle of dry leaves under his feet, sounding like strangled whispers. The smell of frangipani and damp earth was so thick he could taste it in the air. He followed the path his father had crudely drawn on the old map. But this forest seemed to have a will of its own. After just a short distance, the familiar path became strange. The ancient trees seemed to shift their positions, and thorn bushes sprang up to block his way. The forest was deliberately trying to make him lose his way, to trap him in its labyrinth. Kian had to stop, trying to orient himself with a cheap compass, but the needle just spun aimlessly. Amelia's psychological warfare began. He heard voices. They were no longer meaningless whispers. He heard the voice of his grandfather, who had died of a sudden heart attack. He heard the voice of his great-grandfather, who had fallen from a roof. The voices of all the men of the Vu clan who had died because of the curse. They whispered from all around in the darkness, blaming him, begging him to turn back, telling him he would fail just like all of them. And then, he heard his father's voice, no longer pleading, but full of accusation. "Why did you come here? You'll only bring more disaster. Go back. Let things be." "No." Kian screamed into the darkness, his hand tightening on the knife. "I will end this. Once and for all." He pressed on, no longer trusting the path, but heading in the direction of the frangipani tree on the map. Exhausted and disoriented, he suddenly saw a faint light ahead. A glimmer of hope. Perhaps a ranger station, or a hunter's cabin. He dragged his feet toward it. It was a small, dilapidated wooden cabin. Through the glassless window, he saw an unbelievable sight. Uncle Oot was sitting there, alongside a few other close relatives. And sitting in the middle, his back to Kian, was a familiar figure. The figure turned. It was his father. Tung smiled at him, a kind and gentle smile, and waved for him to come in. "Kian, come in, son. It's dangerous out there. Come in here with your family." An illusion of safety and warmth. A trap that was all too sweet. Kian almost stepped forward. But just then, the amulet from Old Man Hack in his pocket suddenly grew hot, a searing sensation like a lit cigarette pressed against his skin. The physical pain snapped him out of the enchantment. He realized that if he stepped into that cabin, his soul would be devoured, trapped forever with those illusions. He turned his back, wiping away tears, and plunged back into the deep darkness, leaving the desperate calls of his father behind. The forest grew more ferocious. Thorny branches whipped his face like leather scourges. Tree roots snaked above the ground, trying to trip him. The path ahead turned into a swamp, mud up to his knees clinging to his legs. He fell, then struggled back up, covered in mud and bleeding cuts, but he didn't stop. And then he saw it. After pushing through a dense thicket, a small clearing appeared, bathed in a silvery, ethereal moonlight. In the middle of the clearing stood a massive white frangipani tree, perhaps hundreds of years old. Its branches were gnarled and twisted like skeletal arms, yet they were covered in clusters of pristine white blossoms that glowed uncannily. The fragrance was so thick it was suffocating. Beneath the tree was a small mound of earth covered in green moss. Amelia's grave. As Kian stepped into the clearing, she appeared. Not as a white shadow or a whisper. She slowly materialized from the moonlight and the swirling frangipani petals, forming a solid, distinct figure. Amelia stood there, a few meters away, looking exactly as she had in his nightmare. Her face was pale and dirt-streaked, her clothes tattered, and her eyes were two bottomless pits of hatred. That hatred was now aimed directly at him. She didn't attack. She spoke, her voice a mixture of pain and fury. "You've come. Another fool from the Vu clan." She showed him illusions. He saw himself drowning in the swamp he had just crossed. He saw images of his future son, then his grandson, continuing to bear the curse, dying in pain and fear. He saw the entire Vu family wiped from the face of the earth. "Returning the hairpin will end nothing," her voice shrieked, echoing through the forest. "My hatred cannot be soothed. It can only be shared." Kian remembered Old Man Hak's words. "Don't talk. Don't argue. Just act." He ignored her and knelt before the grave. He began to dig with his bare hands. The cold, damp earth filled his fingernails. Amelia shrieked, a scream that made the trees tremble and the frangipani petals rain down like a funeral torrent. But she seemed unable to touch him as long as he was performing the act of atonement. He dug a small hole. His hands were scratched and bleeding. With trembling fingers, he took out the jade hairpin. It was as cold as a block of ice. He gently placed it in the hole. Then he took out the knife. Without a moment's hesitation, he made a deep cut across his left palm. Fresh blood welled up, dark red in the moonlight. He clenched his fist, letting the stream of his blood, the blood of the Vu clan, drip down, soaking the jade hairpin and the earth that enveloped it. The moment the first drop of blood touched the hairpin, everything stopped. Amelia's screams died away. The wind ceased. The suffocating air suddenly became light. A soft, green light emanated from the grave. Amelia's form began to turn translucent. The rage on her face softened, replaced by a deep sorrow, and then, seemingly, by peace. A single tear, black as ink, rolled down her cheek. Then she dissolved into the moonlight, merging with the gently falling frangipani petals. It was over. Exhausted, Kian collapsed onto the ground. But an immense sense of relief washed over him. He had done it. The curse was broken. The path out of the forest was suddenly clear and strangely easy to navigate. As he stepped out from the tree line, the first rays of dawn were just beginning to appear. He had won. In the following days, Kian stayed in the old house to clean up. The house was different now. The cold, ghostly feeling was gone. It was just an old, empty house. The silence now brought a sense of peace. He felt a deep relief, as if a weight he had carried on his shoulders since birth had been lifted. He decided to sell the house and the land, to cut ties with the past completely. On his last morning before leaving, Kian stood before the bathroom mirror to shave. He looked at his reflection, a tired man whose eyes no longer held any fear. As he was looking, he noticed something strange. The air in the room was completely still, not a breath of wind, yet a lock of his hair moved slightly, as if an invisible hand had just gently brushed it aside. And then he smelled it. Very faint, but unmistakable. The sweet scent of white frangipani. The blood in Kian's veins turned to ice. He stared intently at the mirror, at his own reflection. And he saw her. Not standing behind him, but inside him. Amelia's pale face was slowly superimposing itself over his in the mirror. Her black, empty eyes stared back at him from his own eye sockets. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her lips. His lips. A voice spoke. Not from outside, but a clear, ghostly whisper, echoing from deep within his mind. I told you, Kian Vu. My hatred cannot be soothed. It can only be shared. Kian was stunned. He wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. The voice continued, filled with a gruesome satisfaction. You were wrong. Your blood wasn't meant to break the curse. It was to sign a contract. You returned my hairpin, gave my soul its anchor back. In exchange, I will no longer haunt your family line. Kian looked into his own eyes in the mirror, now completely Amelia's eyes, and understood the horrifying truth. The curse on his family might have ended, but only because the spirit had found its final, most perfect victim. Why curse an entire lineage, when I can have just one? The voice whispered. Thank you for giving me a new home. Your body. Your mind. We will now have an eternity to keep each other company. Kian's face in the mirror completely transformed into Amelia's for a second, then returned to normal. But he knew she was there. The horror was no longer outside. It was inside him, a part of him, forever. He had freed his family, only to turn himself into an eternal prison for a vengeful spirit. That morning, Tien Vu left Co Moc village. He had cleaned the ancestral house, locked all the doors, and handed the keys to Uncle Lut. Uncle Lut looked at him, his eyes filled with sorrow and guilt. Kian, are you really okay? You look so pale. Kian smiled. It was a perfect smile, the facial muscles relaxed just so, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were now strangely calm, like a lake without a single ripple. I'm fine, Uncle. Just a little tired. It's all over. I'll sell the house and land and send the money back to you and everyone. I won't be coming back here again. Uncle Oot sighed. Yes, that's probably for the best. Forget this place and live your own life. He didn't realize the terrible truth in Kian's words. He wouldn't be coming back, because this place, the spirit of the forest, of the grave, was now inside him. He got in the car and started the engine. The silver sedan rolled down the red dirt road, leaving Co Moc village behind. Kian never once looked back. As the car disappeared from view, Uncle Oot stood there, a vague sense of unease rising within him. He felt something was very strange about his nephew. A coldness, a distance even greater than before. But then he brushed it aside, attributing it to the trauma and grief he had just endured. He had no idea that the Kian Vu he had just spoken to had, in fact, died in the forest the night before. On the highway back to Saigon, Kian turned on the music. A Mozart symphony, complex and grand. He drove calmly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But inside his head was a living hell. The last remnants of Kian Vu's consciousness were screaming in silence. He was locked in a dark corner of his own mind, forced to see, to hear, to feel everything through his own eyes and senses, but unable to control anything. He was like a spectator tied to a chair, forced to watch the world's most terrifying horror film, where the main character was his own body. Be quiet, Amelia's voice echoed in his head, no longer a whisper but a clear, cold command. You're too noisy. Learn to enjoy the silence. I had to endure it for 200 years. Kian struggled in vain. Let me go. This is my body. Not anymore, Amelia replied, her voice filled with a cruel amusement. You willingly offered it to me when you spilled your blood on my grave. A pact was made. Such a warm and beautiful prison. Much better than that cold, dirt hole. Amelia saw the modern world through Kian's eyes. The tall buildings of glass and steel, the rushing traffic, the flashing advertisements. To her, they were not beautiful or impressive. They were just another forest, a forest of stone, with different souls hurrying past. She raised a hand, Kian's hand, touching the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Interesting. This horseless carriage. Your world has changed so much. So many new things to discover. Kian returned to his penthouse. Its clean, minimalist, and modern design seemed to displease Amelia. She walked around the apartment, running her fingers over the glass tabletops, the polished concrete walls. Too many sharp corners. Too much light, she commented in Kian's mind. And not a single flower. The next day, Kian went back to work. His colleagues welcomed him, offering condolences for his family's loss. He thanked them, smiled, and said he was fine. No one noticed the change. But then, little things started to appear. In a design meeting, as everyone was debating the use of materials, Kian suddenly spoke up, his voice flat. Why argue? It doesn't matter what you build it with. In the end, they are all just beautiful tombs for the living. The entire conference room fell silent. Everyone stared at him in astonishment. Kian just smiled faintly, as if he had just uttered a profound philosophical statement, and went back to work. He started developing strange habits. He asked his housekeeper to plant a large pot of white frangipani on the balcony. He would stand there for hours at night, just gazing at the blossoms and inhaling their fragrance. One evening, an ex-girlfriend called him, wanting to reconnect. "I heard you just went through something difficult," the girl said, her voice full of sympathy. "I just wanted to know if you're okay." Inside, Kian's consciousness was screaming. "Help me. Tell her the truth." But his mouth formed different words, in a tone that was sweet yet chilling. "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. But love? It's the most fleeting and deceitful thing in the world, don't you think? It only brings betrayal and suffering." The girl on the other end was stunned into silence before quickly hanging up. That night, Kian stood on the balcony, looking down at the glittering city of Saigon below. The red wine in his glass swirled. "A forest full of souls," Amelia whispered in his mind. "So many fun games await. My curse didn't end, Kian Vu. It just evolved. Instead of being bound to one village, I can now go anywhere. Instead of waiting for generations, I can now choose for myself." Kian's consciousness felt a terror greater than death itself. He understood Amelia's plan. She would use his body, his status, and his life to continue spreading suffering, in a much more sophisticated and cruel way. He hadn't just turned himself into a prison, he had become her weapon. He turned back inside, his reflection cast on the large glass door. For a fleeting moment, the face of the handsome, successful man vanished, replaced by the face of a long-haired, pale-skinned woman with empty black eyes and a satisfied, malevolent smile. Then the image disappeared, returning to the face of Kian Vu. But the smile remained. It stayed on his lips, a smile he could never control again. The curse had ended. A new nightmare had just begun. A month passed. Kian Vu returned to the rhythm of his life as a star architect. He still went to the office, attended meetings, and smiled and shook hands with partners. His outward appearance hadn't changed. If anything, he seemed calmer and more charismatic than before. But the more observant people at the company began to notice strange things. Kian's eyes, once bright and full of passion, were now cold and bottomless. His design ideas became strangely bold, with vast open spaces, long, deep corridors, and complex, labyrinthine structures. They were impressive, but they also evoked a sense of claustrophobia and oppression. Inside his mind, Kian's imprisonment had become a familiar torture. He no longer screamed. He could only huddle in a dark corner of his subconscious, helplessly watching Amelia control his body like a puppet. He was a ghost in his own house. And Amelia was starting to get bored. "Your world is so dull," her voice echoed in Kian's head. "Just work, numbers, and lies. There's no drama, no true vengeance." Her chance to have fun arrived. Kian's firm was competing for a landmark project, designing the National Center for Arts and Culture, an iconic structure for the entire city. Their biggest rival was a rising young architect named Leo Hong, a man known for his talent but also his arrogance. In the past, Leo had publicly mocked one of Kian's old designs, calling it antiquated and unimaginative. That scar still lingered in Kian's memory. And Amelia had found it. "Oh, an enemy," she purred with delight. "One who has hurt you before. Good. I like men like him." "No. Leo isn't a bad person, it's just professional competition." Kian tried to protest in desperation. "Competition?" Amelia scoffed, a silent laugh only Kian could hear. "There is no competition. Only the hunter and the prey. He insulted us. He must pay." Amelia had no intention of winning the project fairly. That was too simple. She wanted to destroy Leo Hong, to crush him mentally and professionally, just as she had once been crushed. And she would use the very weapons of the modern world, information and psychology. First, she used Kian's reputation. He arranged a private meeting with an influential member of the judging panel, a respected old professor. Under the guise of an academic discussion, Kian, Amelia, skillfully planted subtle doubts about Leo Huang's design in the professor's mind. "Leo's design is very ambitious, Professor. But the structure of that large dome. To achieve such an aesthetic curve while ensuring safety during Saigon's stormy season, I fear the cost will be driven up significantly. I'm just afraid that to stay within budget, the contractor might have to use lower quality materials. A huge risk for a national project." The words, full of professional expertise, drawn from Kian's knowledge, and delivered with a humble, community-conscious attitude, completely won over the professor. The seed of doubt had been sown. Next, Amelia made a more vicious move. She spent 2 sleepless nights, using Kian's genius-level skills, to create a different version of Leo Huang's design blueprints. This version looked almost identical to the original, but with a few extremely subtle changes to the technical specifications. A fatal flaw in load-bearing capacity was hidden deep within hundreds of pages of drawings, a flaw that, if built, could lead to a catastrophic collapse. Then, she leaked this fake set of blueprints to a popular architecture blogger online, along with an anonymous email, "I am an engineer on Leo Huang's team. I cannot stand by and watch him gamble with people's lives for his own ambition. These are the real blueprints he plans to use for construction, not the flashy version he's presenting to the judges." The bomb had been planted. The blogger's article exploded on social media just one day before the final presentation. Public opinion was outraged. The press got involved. Leo Hong was submerged in a media crisis he couldn't comprehend. He tried to defend himself, saying the blueprints were fake, but against the professional-looking numbers and technical details, his words sounded weak. The presentation day was tense. Leo Hong, with dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, tried to present his ideas. But the judges, led by the old professor, constantly interrupted him, questioning him about the fatal flaws in the fake design circulating online. "Mr. Hong, how do you explain the safety factor of this main support beam? It's well below the permitted standard," the professor asked, pointing to a detail from the fake blueprint. "Professor, that is not my blueprint," Leo nearly shouted, his composure gone. "Then where is your real one? Do you dare to publicly release the full structural details right here, right now?" Leo was stunned. He couldn't. Releasing the full detailed blueprints in front of a competitor was professional suicide. He had fallen into a perfect trap. All his denials now sounded like clumsy cover-ups. At the end of the session, it was no surprise when the project was awarded to Kian Vu's firm. Leo Hong lost. But he didn't just lose a project. He lost everything. His reputation was ruined. Partners turned their backs on him. The career he had spent his life building vanished into thin air in just a few days. He was seen leaving the conference room like a man whose soul had been ripped out. That evening, Kian stood alone in his vast office, looking down at the model of the National Center for Arts and Culture, the project that would bear his name. Inside his mind, Kian's soul was writhing in agony and disgust. Why? Why would you do that? What did he ever do to deserve this? Amelia answered, her voice cold with absolute satisfaction. His crime. His crime was his arrogance. His crime was existing in my path. You see. No need for ghosts, no need for deep wells or ancient curses. In this forest of glass and steel, man's greatest fear is losing the things he cherishes: fame, money, the future. She raised Kian's hand, gently stroking the roof of the building model. I was buried once. Now, I will be the one who buries others. And I have only just begun. Back in Co Moc village. Since the day Tien Vu left, a strange peace had settled over the village. The whispered stories of the curse seemed to have ended. The Vu family's ancestral home stood silent, no longer exuding a gloomy, ghostly aura. The villagers believed the curse had finally been broken by the last son of the family line. They began to live without the vague fear that had haunted their nights. Only one person did not feel at peace. In his dilapidated shack on the edge of the forest, Old Man Hack grew increasingly uneasy. He had been wrong. He knew he had made a mistake the night he let Kian go into the forest. He had been too confident in the ancient rituals, believing that atoning blood and the return of a memento could appease hatred. But Amelia's hatred wasn't a debt that could be paid in full. It was a disease, a spiritual plague, and he had helped it find a new host in which to metastasize. One night, while meditating before his small altar, Old Man Hack fell into a trance. But instead of seeing the spirits of the mountain forest as usual, a different vision appeared in his mind. He saw a strange forest, one with no trees, only mountains of glass and stone reaching for the sky, glittering with millions of lights like ghostly fireflies. He could feel Amelia's presence, but she was no longer a lone spirit bound to a grave. Her vengeful energy had transformed, becoming vast, pervasive, mingling with the suffocating atmosphere of the millions of people living in that glass forest. And then, he saw Kian. He saw Kian standing on top of one of the glass mountains, looking down below. But when the face turned to look at him, Old Man Hack was horrified to see that the young man's eyes were completely empty, and within them was the cold, triumphant gaze of Amelia. Old Man Hack snapped out of his trance, cold sweat breaking out on his neck. He understood the terrible truth. He hadn't helped Kian break the curse. He had helped it evolve. A heavy sense of guilt and responsibility weighed on his thin shoulders. He could not sit still. Though he was old and had never left Co Moc for more than a day, he knew he had to go. He had to go to that glass forest. He had to face Amelia one more time. He carefully packed his most powerful artifacts into a cloth bag, a bundle of enchanted wormwood, a few pieces of wood from a lightning-struck banyan tree, and a small vial of sacred well water that had been blessed for 49 days. With his bamboo staff and conical hat, Old Man Hack looked like a figure straight out of the past as he boarded the first bus of the day, heading toward the city. The journey was torture for him. The loud engine noise, the strange crowds, the smog-filled air. It all made him feel suffocated. But the image of Amelia's eyes and Kian's body haunted him, urging him onward. After a full day of travel, he finally found the building that housed Kian's architecture firm. He stood before the towering skyscraper of glass and steel, feeling small and out of place. The opulence, coldness, and indifference of the place were the complete opposite of everything he had ever known. He walked into the lobby. The beautiful receptionist looked at him with disdain, as if he were a lost beggar. "Can I help you, sir? I want to see Mr. Kian Vu. Do you have an appointment, sir? Our CEO is very busy. Just tell him Old Man Hack from Co Moc is here to see him." In his office on the top floor, Amelia, was reviewing a design. Suddenly, she paused, an amused smile playing on her lips. She had felt his presence. That faint but familiar spiritual energy. "Well, look who's here," she whispered in Kian's mind. "The old firefly from the old forest. How nostalgic. Let him come up." Old Man Hack was escorted to Kian's office. The room was vast and minimalist, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city. Kian was standing with his back to the door, looking out. "Please, have a seat," he said without turning around. Old Man Hack did not sit. He stood in the middle of the room, his hand clutching his bamboo staff. "I didn't come here to sit. Amelia. I know it's you." Kian slowly turned around. He smiled, a polite but lifeless smile. "Old Man Hack. What brings you all the way from that backwater village? There are no graves here, no frangipani trees for you to work your magic on. Release the boy's body." Old Man Hack shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "He helped you find peace. Why are you still here?" Amelia laughed, the sound erupting from Kian's mouth. "Peace? You naive old man. I don't need peace. I need a life. And he gave it to me. Now, if you have nothing else." Old Man Hack knew talking was useless. He pulled the vial of sacred water from his bag and flicked it forcefully toward Kian. The water, which should have burned a vengeful spirit, merely hissed as it hit Kian's expensive suit, evaporating and leaving behind a yellow stain. Kian didn't even flinch. He walked forward, looking at the old man with pity. "Village well water is probably just good for washing vegetables, old man." Terrified, Old Man Hack stumbled back, pulling out a black wooden amulet. He began to chant, trying to focus all his mental energy. But Amelia just walked calmly forward and held out a hand. Old Man Hack felt an invisible, cold force push him back, preventing him from taking another step. Kian gently took the amulet from the old man's hand, inspecting it like a strange antique. "These wooden toys are useless here, old man," Amelia said through Kian's mouth. "My power no longer comes from dirt or trees. It comes from here." She raised an index finger and tapped it lightly against Kian's temple. It comes from the fear, the greed, the despair of the millions of people crammed into this glass forest. The energy here is more abundant than in any forest of yours. Old man Hack stood frozen. He understood now. His magic, tied to the land, to ancient rituals, was completely useless against a spirit that had merged with a human host and was drawing power from modern society itself. He had lost. Amelia didn't kill him. That would be too simple and boring. She leaned in, whispering into the trembling old man's ear with a voice as cold as ice, "Go back to your village and pray. Pray that I don't get bored of this city and decide to visit home. Next time, I won't need a family line to vent my anger on." She paused for a second, letting the threat sink into the old man's very being. "Your entire village might be just enough to amuse me." Old man Hack stumbled out of the office, out of the skyscraper, like a sleepwalker. He was completely broken. Not only had he failed to save Kian, but in his attempt to fix his mistake, he had just put all of Co Moc on Amelia's list of future playthings. Inside the office, Kian watched the pathetic old man's figure disappear into the bustling crowd below. And inside his mind, Tien Vu's last glimmer of hope was extinguished. The only person who knew the truth had been defeated. He was truly, utterly alone in his own personal hell. The life of Kian Vu continued perfectly. He was a shining star in the architectural world, a successful, sophisticated, and mysterious man. No one knew that behind those calm eyes, a brutal war was being waged every second of every minute. Amelia was starting to get annoyed. Kian's resistance, even if only subconscious, was an irritation to her. It was like a constant buzzing in her ear, a reminder that this body was not entirely hers. Kian no longer screamed, he just stayed silent, withdrawn into a dark corner of his mind, turning his very existence into a silent protest. "Your silence is annoying," Amelia told him one afternoon, as she stood admiring the pot of white frangipani on the balcony. The flowers bloomed with an unnatural vibrancy, pristine white and intensely fragrant in the heart of the polluted city. "You think if you just stay quiet, I'll leave you alone? You're mistaken. I'm tired of the games outside. Now it's time for you and I to truly get acquainted." That night, Amelia gave Kian no peace. She no longer attacked him with ghostly images or eerie sounds. She used an even more terrifying weapon, his own memories. She ripped Kian's soul from its familiar dark corner and threw him into a blurry, surreal space. He recognized the place. It was the ancestral home in Co Moc, but from 20 years ago. He saw himself as a skinny boy, standing in front of his study desk. Across from him was his father, Tien Vu. In Kian's original memory, this was a sad evening. His father, after studying his old books, had told him about the family's burden in a tired and stern voice. But in Amelia's version, everything was different. The father in this memory turned to look at him. His eyes were no longer sad but glowed with an eerie green light. When he spoke, it was not his voice, but a mixture of his and Amelia's wailing whisper. "You must be strong, Kian. This burden is your destiny. You will never escape. Ever." The wooden walls of the house warped, melting like candle wax. His father's face melted away, transforming into the waterlogged face of Amelia. She smiled, a silent, soundless smile. The first memory, her voice echoed. Your fear of your own father. Not a bad start. The space shattered. Amelia threw him into another memory. This time, the pain was even more cutting. He was in a stark white hospital room. On the bed lay his mother, thin and pale in her final days. She had a heart condition, but everyone knew it was the heavy atmosphere of the curse in that house that had slowly killed her. In the real memory, she had held his hand and told him to live his own life, to escape Co Moc. It was Kian's most sacred and painful memory, the driving force behind his ambition. Amelia decided to destroy it. The mother in this memory opened her eyes. She did not look at him with love. She looked at him with blame. Why did you leave me, Kian? She whispered, and then her voice gradually transformed, becoming Amelia's, cold and sharp as a knife. You always just wanted to run away. You left your father to bear the burden alone. You left your mother to die slowly in solitude. You are also a betrayer, a selfish man, just like your ancestor, just like the one who gave me this hairpin. No. That's not true. Kian screamed in his mind. He tried to rush to his mother's bedside, but his feet were rooted to the floor. Yes, Amelia continued through his mother's mouth. You loved her the most, but you were also the one who caused her the most pain. This regret, it will gnaw at you forever. The image of his mother dissolved, leaving Kian on his knees, his soul shattered. The safest sanctuaries in his mind, the memories he cherished, had all been invaded and defiled by Amelia. He no longer knew what was real and what was fake. His identity, his very being, was being torn to shreds. The torture continued night after night. Amelia dragged him through a labyrinth of memories with no escape. He had to re-witness being bullied by schoolmates, but now their faces were all Amelia's. He had to relive the failure of his first love, but now the girl rejected him with the spirit's own cruel words. Every disappointment, every sorrow, every regret in Kian's life was dragged out, dissected, and injected with Amelia's venom. Kian's soul grew weary. He no longer had the strength to resist, nor any place to hide. When she saw he was at his absolute limit, Amelia made her offer. She brought him to an empty space, just an endless white void. For the first time, she appeared before him not in a grotesque form, but as a blurry, faceless silhouette. You see. Her voice echoed, this time without mockery, but with a terrifying calmness. The more you resist, the more you suffer. Your past, your love, they are all just chains strangling you. But there is a way out. Death. Kian's thought flickered weakly. Death is too common, Amelia replied. I have a better offer. Give up. Give up that weak and suffering self. Let it dissolve. Merge your soul with mine. Then, all suffering will end. There will be no more Kian to endure, no more Amelia to be angry. Only us. One will. One existence. You won't have to feel anything anymore. You will have eternal peace. Peace. The offer, though horrifying, held an irresistible allure to a soul that had been tortured to its limit. A release from all pain, all memory. A sweet annihilation. Kian's soul trembled. He stood before his final choice. Continue to exist as a silently tortured prisoner, or accept assimilation, annihilation, in exchange for tranquility. In the luxurious office on the top floor of the glass tower, Kian Vu's body sat motionless in an armchair, his eyes gazing blankly at the city at night. He sat as still as a statue. And on his cheek, a single, cold tear slowly rolled down. The white void in Kian's consciousness was terrifyingly still. Amelia's offer hung in the air, both a curse and a venomous salvation. To become one. To end all suffering. Kian's soul, now just a flickering glimmer of light, trembled. He no longer had the strength to scream, no more tears to cry. All he had left was exhaustion, a weariness that reached the very depths of his existence. He remembered the memories Amelia had defiled. His father's angry face, his mother's blaming eyes, his failures, his loneliness. They were like starving leeches, latched on, draining his life force. His existence was now just a long chain of torment. And then, his mind drifted to another memory. One not created by Amelia. It was the feeling of being at the bottom of the well. At the time, he had been terrified. But now, thinking back, he realized something else. It was very dark, very cold, and very quiet down there. There were no demands of life, no burdens of the past, no judgments. Just a primal silence, an all-encompassing, simple darkness. It was like returning to the earth, where everything begins and ends. The peace of a grave. I'm tired, Kian's thought echoed weakly, the first time he had actively spoken to Amelia, not with resistance, but with surrender. I'm just so tired. Amelia's blurry silhouette seemed to nod slightly. She didn't need to say anything more. She just had to wait. And Kian made his decision. He looked at Amelia's shadow, no longer with fear, but with an empty acceptance. I agree. A whisper. An abdication. The moment the word was uttered, the assimilation began. It wasn't painful or violent. On the contrary, it was strangely gentle. The flickering light that was Kian's soul began to dissolve, not vanishing, but breaking into thin, silken threads that slowly drifted toward Amelia's dark form. His memories, one by one, were unraveled. The love for his mother, the fear of his father, the ambition of an architect, the remorse for his mistakes. They were no longer his. They became pure streams of energy, flowing into and nourishing Amelia's soul. He felt a strange lightness. The burden he had carried his whole life was slowly being lifted. The pain vanished. Thoughts ceased. The torment ended. The last thing he felt was the scent of white frangipani. But this time, it was not overpowering or grotesque. It was faint and gentle, like a lullaby singing him into an eternal sleep. And then, nothing. Absolute silence. The peace of the deep grave. Tien Vu no longer existed. Back in the real world. In the luxurious office on the top floor. The tear on the man's cheek had dried. His eyes, which had been staring blankly, blinked once. They refocused. But this focus was not human. It was as sharp, cold, and profoundly intelligent as that of an ancient predator. Only one consciousness remained. A complete existence. Kian stood up. His body moved with a fluid grace, completely at ease, with no trace of awkwardness. He walked to the large mirror in the corner of the room, facing his own reflection. It was still the face of Kian Vu. The same hair, the same eyes, the same build. But now, it was just a perfect shell. Amelia looked in the mirror. She felt a sense of completeness she had never known. No more fragmentation. No more opposing voice in her head. She had absorbed all of Kian. Not just his body, but his soul, memories, knowledge, and skills. They were hers now. The memories of love or guilt no longer evoked any emotion. They were simply data, useful tools. She had won. An absolute victory. A real smile, for the first time, formed on Kian's lips. It was Amelia's smile. A smile of self-satisfaction, and beyond that, an excitement for what was to come. Her goal was no longer petty revenge. That was too mundane. She, who had been denied a life, a family, a future, would now create her own legacy in this modern world. Her children would not be made of flesh and bone. They would be skyscrapers, cold complexes, magnificent architectural works that she would design with Kian's mind. Those structures, in their own way, would carry her soul. Spaces designed to instill in their inhabitants a sense of loneliness, a subtle suffocation, slowly draining their life force without them ever knowing. She would no longer be a vengeful spirit demanding a blood debt. She would become a dark goddess of the metropolis, an architect of sorrows. Amelia looked out at the city lighting up through the glass window. Countless lights, countless souls. No longer a forest to hunt in, but a giant block of clay, waiting for the artist's hand. A life was stolen, she thought, her voice now her own, echoing in the silence of her new mind. Now it's time to build a legacy from its ashes. Thank you for your interest and for listening to the channel story. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for listening.